The Council Commander of Duskwall died at his own desk with a river fee dispute half-signed under his hand, and Wrenna Coss, who found him, understood within the first breath that the worst thing about it was the timing. He was slumped forward over the harbour ledgers in the grey pre-dawn light of the council keep, a big man gone suddenly small, one hand still curled around the pen, the ink dried mid-word where his heart had stopped him. Commander Orrin Vale, no relation to any magistrate of that name, a pale edge warrior of 60 who had held the river mouth for 7 years and the council chair with it, had the peaceful, surprised face of a man who had not expected the morning to be his last, which no one ever does. There was no violence in it, just an old soldier's overworked heart, stopping in the dark, alone, at his desk, in the exact week the city could least afford an empty chair. Wrenna stood in the cold stone room and made herself look at all of it before she let herself feel any of it, because she was the council's steward and looking clearly was her whole trade. She was 44, lean and grey-templed in the plain dark wool and iron council, pin of her office with the ink-stained fingers of a lifetime spent keeping other people's decisions in order. She was not a warrior. That mattered enormously, and she knew it, standing over the dead commander in the dawn. In a city that governed by demonstrated military competence, Wrenna Coss held no authority of her own at all. She was the memory of the council, the keeper of its records, the woman who made the warriors' decisions into paper and the paper into the city's law, and she had at this moment more actual power than anyone in Duskwall, because she was the only person who knew the chair was empty, and she had a few minutes to decide what to do with knowing it first. Because the timing was the thing, the half-signed dispute under the commander's dead hand was not a small matter. It was the harbour fee negotiation, the annual setting of what the Consortium paid to move its trade up the river, and this year, for the first time in living memory, it had become a fight, because this year someone on the council had finally started asking the question the city had spent 2 generations not asking. What is the river actually worth, and why are we charging so little for it? An empty chair in an ordinary week was a sad thing and a solved thing. The council would mourn and meet, and choose the next most capable warrior, and the river would run on. An empty chair in this week was a door thrown open, and Wrenna Coss, alone with the body in the dawn, could hear already the 3 sets of footsteps that were going to come through it. She had until the council convened to think, which was not long, and she spent it doing what she always did, which was laying the pieces out in her mind the way she laid documents on the council table, in order, weighted, with the dangerous ones on top. There were 3 people who could take the chair, and they were not merely 3 candidates. They were 3 answers to the question the dead commander had left half-signed, and choosing between them was choosing the city's whole future, which was a thing Duskwall's warrior tradition was spectacularly unequipped to do, because the tradition chose leaders by competence in war, and this was not a war. The first was Captain Hale Durin, and Wrenna wrote him first because he was the safe one, and the safe one is always the most dangerous. Durin was the wall commander, 40, capable, well-liked, a solid pale edge warrior who had held the inland gate through 2 bad undead seasons and never lost it. He was also quietly the Consortium's man, not bought, nothing so crude but comfortable. A man who had grown up alongside the Consortium's presence in Duskwall and could not imagine the city any other way, who thought the harbour fee fight was reckless and the current arrangement sensible and the whole leverage question a dangerous fantasy that would bring retaliation the city couldn't survive. Durin in the chair meant the half-signed dispute torn up, the fees left where they were, the Consortium's man comfortably in charge, and Duskwall going on exactly as it had for 2 generations, dependent, quiet and safe, right up until the day safe stopped being on offer. The second was Commander Sira Voss, no kin to Wrenna's own line, a hard, brilliant, furious woman of 50 who commanded the harbour defences, and who was the one who had started the fee fight in the first place. Voss had looked at 2 generations of Duskwall charging Rivermouth pennies for a choke point the whole Consortium depended on, and had gone from irritated to incandescent, and wanted now to use the leverage to close the river, or threaten to, until the Consortium paid what the passage was actually worth. She was right about the arithmetic. She was right that the city was being quietly robbed by its own timidity. And she was, Wrenna feared, exactly the kind of right that got a small city crushed, because the Consortium did not lose choke points gracefully, and a warrior's instinct to seize leverage was not the same as the patience to survive using it. Voss in the chair meant the leverage finally used, and the city discovering, perhaps too late, what 5 families did to a river town that made itself expensive. The third was old Tomas Raid, and Wrenna wrote him last and underlined him, because he was the one nobody was going to suggest. Raid was not really a warrior anymore, 70, half lame, a council member whose family had kept the Duskwall commercial accounts for 4 generations, and who was the closest thing the warrior council had to a person who actually understood the consortium relationship. He did not want the chair. He had never wanted the chair. But Raid was the only person on the council who understood both halves of the city, the wall and the wharf, the war and the trade, and Wrenna had spent 7 years watching him be the quiet voice that kept the council's commercial decisions from being disasters, and she thought, standing over the dead commander, that he might be the only one of the 3 who could hold the balance the moment demanded, precisely because he was the only one who didn't want it. And there, in the cold dawn, Wrenna Coss met the actual shape of her problem, which was worse than choosing among 3. She was the steward, she did not choose. That was the whole point of her office. The steward kept the process, she did not drive it. The council chose by its own tradition, and the steward made the choosing legitimate. If she put her thumb on the scale and it was found out, every decision the new commander ever made would be tainted by it, and in a city as small and proud as Duskwall, a tainted chair was a broken one. Her power was exactly and only this. She controlled the 3 days of process between the empty chair and the full one. She set the order of the meetings, the sequence of the arguments, who was heard and when. She could not choose, but she could build the room in which the choosing happened. And she had 3 days and a body to bury and a half-signed dispute burning a hole in the desk, and she could hear them now, the first footsteps in the keep's outer hall, coming for the news, no time at all. The Consortium knew the commander was dead before the council did, which told Wrenna everything about the 3 days to come. She had sent the death word out by the proper channels, the council members first in order of seniority by runner, and before the last runner had reached the last councillor, the Consortium's senior representative was at the door of the keep, in good coastal wool, with a face arranged into precisely the correct amount of sympathy. His name was Phaon Serral, and he had been Duskwall's Consortium man for 11 years, and he was very good at his job, which was not trade. His job was Astra's eyes, and he had been reporting the fee dispute to Astra for months, and here he was, condolences ready at an empty chair, before the council had even gathered to be sad. Steward Coss, Serral's bow was exactly correct. Terrible news. Commander Vale was a fine man and a steady hand. The city will feel this. I won't intrude on the council's grief. I came only to say that the Consortium's offices are entirely at Duskwall's service through the transition, whatever the city needs. Continuity is a comfort in these times. And to leave this, he set a sealed letter on the steward's table, unhurried, which is merely the Consortium's formal condolence, and a note that our standing arrangements continue unchanged through any transition, as is customary. One less thing for a grieving council to worry over. The fees, the traffic, all of it continues as it stands. Nothing need change in a hard week. And there it was, Wrenna thought, watching him bow himself out, the first move, made before the body was cold and made beautifully. Nothing need change. The half-signed dispute, torn up not by force but by grief and inertia and the sheer comfort of continuity. Serral was not going to fight for Durin's chair. He was going to make sure that the easiest thing, the kindest thing, the thing a shocked and mourning council would reach for by pure exhausted instinct, was to change nothing, and changing nothing was the Consortium winning the whole war without lifting a hand. The empty chair filled, by default, with the ghost of the old arrangement. Wrenna picked up the sealed condolence letter and did not open it and set it, deliberately, not on the table where the council would see it first thing, but in the records chest, filed, logged, and out of sight. It was a tiny thing. It was the first move she made in 3 days of moves that were all going to have to be tiny, because tiny was the only size of move a steward was allowed. She could not choose the chair. But she could decide whether the council's first act of grief was to read a Consortium letter promising them the comfort of never having to think. Then the council came, in ones and twos, grey-faced in the early light, and Duskwall began to mourn its commander and reach, without knowing it was reaching, for what would come after. The first council meeting was grief, and the second, that same afternoon, was the disaster Wrenna had known was coming, because the warrior tradition met the commercial question head-on and had no idea what to do with it. They gathered in the council hall, a hard grey room built for war planning, its walls hung with the Rivermouth's defensive maps, no comfort anywhere in it, and they did the thing Pale Edge warriors did, which was try to solve a succession the way they solved a defense, by weighing competence and closing ranks fast, because an undefended position is a dead one. And within an hour it had gone wrong, because the competence they knew how to weigh was competence in war, and the chair they were filling was not, this week, about war at all. Durin holds the inland gate and has for a decade, said one old captain. He's the steadiest hand we have. In a hard week you want steady. I say Durin, and I say we settle it today before the city feels the gap." "Steady," said Sira Voss, and the word came out of her like a blade clearing its sheath. She was on her feet before she decided to be harbour hard, furious, magnificent, and entirely wrong for the room. "Steady is the word we've used to rob ourselves for 2 generations. Do you know what passes up that river in a season? I do, I guard it. Do you know what we charge for it? Pennies. Pennies for the one gate the whole Consortium's inland trade cannot live without. Oren Vale was about to fix that. He died with the pen in his hand, and your answer is to put the Consortium's own comfortable man in the chair and tear up the last thing Oren ever tried to do. That's not steady. That's a city too frightened to pick up the one weapon it's got." And when the Consortium answers that weapon, Durin said, quiet, reasonable, and this was why he was dangerous, because he was not a fool and his fear was not cowardice. When 5 families decide Duskwalls become expensive and unreliable, and they fund a rival landing downriver, or they stop provisioning our walls, or they simply wait us out through one bad and dead season with the harbour fees they're withholding, what then, Sira? You want to use the leverage. Fine. Use it once wrong, and there's no city left to use it a second time. We are 5,000 people on a wall. They are the world. Steady isn't fear. Steady is knowing exactly how small we are. And the room split hard down the middle, the wall captains to Durin and safety, the harbour officers to Voss and the weapon, and Wrenna Coss sat at the steward's place with her records open and watched the council of a warrior city tear itself in half over a question warriors were never built to answer, and understood that if she let this run its own course it would end one of 2 ways. Durin by exhausted default, and the city sold quietly forever. Or Voss by fury, and the city smashed loudly within the year. Both of the loud answers were on the table. The quiet third answer was not, because the quiet third answer was a lame old man who didn't want it, and whom no one would ever name in a room full of warriors weighing competence in war. So Wrenna, who could not choose, did the one thing a steward could do. She adjourned them. "The commander is not yet buried," she said into the shouting in the flat, clear voice of the keeper of the process. "Tradition holds that no chair is filled above an unburied commander. We bury Oren Vale tomorrow with the honors he's owed. We convene the succession the morning after. You will all of you be steadier." She let the word sit, aimed, with a night's grief between you and this. "The process will keep. I will keep it." It was entirely correct. It was also a full day bought, for nothing but the hope that a day was worth something, and as the council filed out still simmering, Wrenna Coss began, quietly, to spend it. She spent the bought day doing the only thing her office actually let her do, which was talk to people one at a time about the record, and steer, by nothing more than the order of her questions, what each of them understood before the room met again. She went to Tomas Raid first in his cluttered accounts room down by the wharf, and she did not ask him to want the chair because he didn't and wouldn't. She asked him a question about the record. "The harbour fee arithmetic," she said. "Sira Voss keeps saying we charge pennies. Durin keeps saying using the leverage is suicide. They're both shouting numbers neither of them has actually run. You've kept these accounts 30 years, Tomas. Somebody on this council must have actually done the arithmetic, what the passage is worth, and what the Consortium would truly do about a fair fee versus a closed river. Who has?" And old Raid looked at her for a long moment over his spectacles, and Wrenna watched him understand that she was not really asking who. She was asking him to say what he knew. "The harbour masters run it," Raid said slowly. 18 months, never brought it to the full council, told me once in confidence because she needed someone to check her figures and I'm the only one who reads a ledger. He took off the spectacles, rubbed his eyes. "It's not what Voss thinks and it's not what Durin fears, Wrenna. That's the trouble. The truth's in the middle where nobody's standing. There's a fee, a real fee, 3 times what we charge, still less than what a rival downriver landing would cost the Consortium to build and defend, that we could set and they would simply pay, grumbling because paying us is cheaper than replacing us. Not closing the river, not robbery, just charging what the thing is worth at a number they can't afford to fight. It transforms the city's revenue. And it doesn't invite the retaliation because it never makes us more expensive than the alternative. It's the answer, and nobody will hear it because it's a ledger answer in a room full of swords." "Then the harbour master needs to say it," Wrenna said, "to the full council with the figures." "She won't," Raid said. "She's waited 18 months for someone to ask her the right question. Nobody has. She's an officer, Wrenna, not a politician. She'll answer a question put to her by the council in the open on the record. She will not volunteer to walk into that split room and take a side. You'd have to," he stopped and looked at the steward and something moved behind the old commercial eyes. "You'd have to build a meeting where the right question got asked, out loud, on the record. By someone the room can't dismiss." I keep the process, Wrenna said mildly. I set the order of what's heard. Yes, said Tomas Raid and put his spectacles back on, and there was the ghost of a grim smile in it. You do. She went to the harbour master next, Captain Isolde Mar, a spare exact woman who ran the Rivermouth's operations and hoarded her arithmetic like ammunition, and Wrenna did not ask her to reveal it. She asked her a procedural question, steward to officer, on the record. At the succession meeting, the council will weigh the fee dispute as part of weighing the candidates, since the candidates disagree on it. As harbour master, you may be asked for the operational figures. Will you have them ready to give, if asked, in full? If asked, said Isolde Mar, in full, on the record. Yes, steward, if asked. Good, said Wrenna. Then I'll make sure the order of the meeting reaches the operational figures before it reaches the vote. Procedurally, the council can't weigh a decision it hasn't heard the facts on. That's tradition too. It was barely, and it was the truest thing Wrenna said in 3 days, and it was also the whole game, and both women knew it, and neither said so. They buried Oren Vale at dawn on the 3rd day, in the warrior ground inside the inland wall, with his sword laid on his chest, and the whole council in grey and the wall companies in their ranks. And the city stood in the cold and grieved a steady man honestly, and Phaon Serral of the Consortium stood at a respectful distance in good wool and watched the succession he thought he'd already won. And an hour after the grave was closed, the council convened to fill the chair in the hard grey war room, and Wrenna Coss, who could not choose, laid out the order of the meeting she had spent 3 days building. She did it perfectly straight because it had to be perfectly straight or it was worthless. She did not argue for anyone. She did not name Raid, whom no one had thought of. She simply kept the process, and the process, as she had built it, went in an order. First, the candidates, all 3 formally entered, and the council would note that the fee dispute divided them, Durin against and Voss for. Second, because a council cannot weigh a decision it has not heard the facts on, which is tradition, the operational figures on what the dispute actually concerned, from the officer who held them. The harbour master will give the council the Rivermouth arithmetic, Wrenna said, flat and clear, in full before the council weighs candidates who disagree about it. The council should not choose between 2 positions without hearing the ground they stand on, Captain Mar. And Isolde Mar asked at last, on the record in the open, by a process no one could call rigged because it was only the steward keeping order, stood up and gave the council her 18 months of hoarded arithmetic. The real number. 3 times the current fee and still cheaper than any alternative the Consortium could build. Not robbery, not surrender. The thing the passage was actually worth, at a price 5 families would pay grumbling because fighting it cost more. She laid it out figure by figure in her spare exact voice, and the hard grey room went quiet, because it was the first time in 2 generations that the whole council had heard out loud that the choice was not between safe and poor and bold and doomed. There was a 3rd door. There had always been a 3rd door. Nobody had asked the woman who could see it. Wrenna watched it land, and watched the room's whole shape change, and said nothing, because saying anything now would ruin it. Durin shifted first. If the figure holds, if it's truly under what a rival landing costs them, then it's not the reckless thing. I opposed closing the river. I don't oppose being paid fairly for it, if fairly is a number they'll simply pay. He looked, unwillingly, convinced at Isolde Mar. Does it hold, Captain? It holds, said Mar. I've checked it against 3 years of their own traffic. It holds. And Sira Voss, furious, brilliant Voss, who had wanted to seize the weapon, looked at the figure and understood visibly that it gave her the thing she actually wanted, the fair price, the city's independence. Without the war she'd have started to get it, and that she could not, in honesty, argue against a number that won her the fight without the bloodshed. I still say we should have done it years ago, she said, grudging, which for Voss was surrender. And into that changed room, a council that had walked in split between 2 loud wrong answers and now stood, blinking, in front of a quiet right one. Old Tomas Raid spoke for the first time from his seat, not standing, because his leg wouldn't. Then the chair's not really the question anymore, is it? Raid said mildly. The question was never which warrior, it was which future. And you've just picked the future, the fair fee, the middle road, the 3rd door. So now you only need a commander who'll hold that road, not the one who'd tear the fee up for comfort, and not the one who'd close the river for pride. Someone who understands both the wall and the wharf well enough to keep the road once you've chosen it. He let that sit, and the room, following the logic he'd laid like a trail, arrived where Wrenna had hoped for 3 days it might arrive on its own. I'd suggest, Raid said with enormous reluctance, because he meant the reluctance, that we stop looking for the boldest sword in the room and start looking for the steadiest head. And I'd suggest, may the tides forgive me, that you're all looking at him, and he's too old and too lame for it and doesn't want it. which is precisely why he's the only one of us the Consortium can't comfort and can't frighten. The room looked at Tomas Raid, and Wrenna Coss, steward keeper of the process, who had not chosen and could prove she had not chosen, watched the Council of Duskwall arrive by its own path in its own time at the chair she had spent 3 days building a room to make visible, and kept her face still, and her hands folded, and said only when they turned to her, "The Council may enter a nomination. I'll record it." Tomas Raid took the chair he did not want, and hated it, and was exactly right for it, which is the only reliable sign that a small city has chosen well. The fee was set at the harbour master's number within the month. Phaon Serral carried the news to Astra, and Astra grumbled and paid exactly as the arithmetic had promised, because a fair fee on an irreplaceable river was cheaper to pay than to fight, and the Consortium, whatever else it was, could read a ledger better than anyone. Duskwall's revenue climbed, the walls got their new works, the city took one careful step back from the dependence that had made it uncomfortable for 2 generations, and did it without ever once making itself expensive enough to be worth destroying. Voss got her fair price. Durin kept his safe city. Both of them, to their own surprise, could live with it. That was how Wrenna knew Raid had been the right chair. He'd found the answer that let both of the loud ones be quietly, grudgingly satisfied. And the leverage, the great uncomfortable weapon, the river the whole Consortium depended on, stayed exactly as uncomfortable as it had always been. That was the part Wrenna sat with after in the quiet of the records room, filing the succession into the city's permanent memory in her careful ink-stained hand. They had not solved the leverage. They had used a sliver of it, wisely, once. But Duskwall still sat on the one gate 5 families could not live without, still small, still 5,000 people on a wall, still holding a weapon far too large for its hand, and the next crisis, the next empty chair, the next hard week, the whole question would be right back on the table, because a choke point is a thing you manage forever, not a thing you solve. Raid knew it, Wrenna knew it. Somewhere in Astra, a representative's report knew it. The city had bought itself a wiser arrangement and a stronger wall and precisely no safety at all, because there is no safety for the small thing that holds the large thing's throat. There is only the managing of it, week by week, chair by chair, forever. Wrenna Coss closed the record and banked the lamp and sat a moment in the dark of the room where the city kept its memory, 44 years old, no authority of her own, the most quietly powerful person in Duskwall and the only one who would never sit in any chair. She had not chosen the commander. She could prove it. She had only built the room where the right choice could be seen, set the order, asked the officer the question, buried the letter that promised comfort, bought the day that let grief cool into thought. Tiny moves, the only size a steward was allowed, and a city stood a little straighter for them and would never know her hand was in it, and that, Wrenna had decided long ago, was the entire and sufficient reward of her strange small office, to be the shape of the room and never the thing standing in it. She locked the record's chest, where a sealed Consortium condolence letter still lay filed and unread beneath 3 days of the city's true history, and went home through the cold streets of the gate at the river's mouth, past the dark water carrying the world's trade upstream, under the walls that faced the patient dead. A small city holding a large weapon it still didn't know how to keep, with a reluctant old man in its chair and a steady steward in its shadows, going on, one managed week at a time. Exactly as it always had, and exactly as, for now, it still could.